Faith, thank you so much for being on today's episode. I am very excited for this because one, you share the same name as one of my sisters. So she's going to be like, yes. But also, two, you have this episode specifically is the first that I believe are one of the skill sets most people don't talk about, and the fact of the soft skill sets that are very crucial for people's like overall, just I would say relationships, development as a person, and their career as well. So we'll jump into that a little bit later, but I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show and being able to share your story as well.
Thanks, Jermaine. Appreciate you having me on.
Now, you have an interesting background. I feel like I typically feel like I'm the only one who has this, where I feel like a jack of all trades. My career kind of goes all over the place. But you've done journalism, you have storytelling background, you've gone into consulting, you've worked with big companies like Google, BCG, and you decided to basically turn your skill sets, your passions into your own business. Most people don't do that, but I love when people decide to do that because I'm in this space as well. But allow us to understand a little bit more about like who Faith is and specifically what is this consultancy all.
Absolutely. So, like you, I like to describe my interests as a constellation. I'm interested in everything from writing to soft skills to engineering. I got an engineering degree. I also got a degree in a language. So, I know some Russian. I did demand response, energy efficiency, technology research in Russia pre war. And so, I think that the summary of all my experiences, I'm always trying to find ways and different threads that go through. And a couple of those that I've come up with is one, the soft skills piece. So every opportunity that I've gotten has been because of soft skills, and things like reaching out to people and talking to them and being able to communicate is something that's been really, really valuable for all these experiences. The second kind of thread that ties through is education. And so I've always been really passionate about teaching ever since I was quite young. My sister has some learning difficulties, and so I wanted to make sure that she had the best opportunity in school. And when she was having these challenges, learning how to describe things in a way that made sense to her was always so fun to me. And whether that was teaching her math with fruit so that she could, visually conceptualize what the different tactic she was learning in math was or whatnot, that was something that I've always been really passionate about. And then the third piece is writing and problem solving. So I think that a lot of people, there's this artificial separation between the arts and the sciences, where people go, oh, well, you have the art side, you're a creative person, or you're a technical person. You don't get both. But I think that language and writing and critical inquiry, literary criticism, and problem solving, analytics, continuous improvement, that sort of mindset is very, very similar. And so both of those things in the guise of let's not separate the arts and sciences, that's kind of like the third thread that you could say that ties through my experience. So as I think about the things that I've done so far, the best synthesis I've come up with so far for that is soft skills. And so I have a soft skills consultancy. The main people that I find being most interested or most helped by this is people who are very technical, people who are very creative, or people who are newer to the workforce. So Gen Z.
That's incredible. First of all, I applaud you for your background, and I am not that good at language. I only speak one, and I feel like I barely do that one really well. So I manage the best way I possibly can. But I do applaud you for being able to find that silver lining because I feel like most people don't. And I know for myself,
It's hard.
it took a while to figure out where are all these components meeting. Like where, if you look at how people look at frequencies, there's typically that line in between. I'm like, I don't know what that line is for me. And then somebody had to help me kind of figure that out. But it's good that you've been able to identify that. But now you're helping people to with that specifically, which is pretty
100%.
nice. So, I mean, you do a lot of things from consulting to strategies with AI, which is a whole different topic we're going to talk about a little bit later as well too. Do you feel that when people hear the word soft skills, they kind of like put it underneath the rug, or is it like because I know most people look at like the hard skills, the tactics, the like the tangible things. But interestingly enough, I feel that because of how much technology we probably have, now people leaning more on the soft skills and like they have to raise that bar. But what's been your experience so far since this is like your realm?
Definitely. No, so I completely agree with you in terms of the terminology. If I could go back in time and say soft skills versus hard skills, I'd probably call soft skills something else. I don't know. I've heard lots of different things: necessary skills, core skills, durable skills, work skills. All of those I think have maybe a better connotation than soft skills, because the last thing I want to think is soft skills are soft and they're just kind of this, weak thing, or they don't actually provide any value, or they don't get you anything. Someone recently told me soft skills are the ones that pay the bills. And I liked that. We're all for
Sure.
rhyming here when we talk about language, but I think that it really is somewhat fighting that connotation, in a sense of the tactical skills, the technical skills are absolutely important. You need those. Those really, really change. Today's world, they go like that, and then it's obsolete, right? And so the skills obsolescence in some fields is a matter of weeks and months instead of years or careers. And so when you think about what skills you need to have to be able to continue upskilling yourself on those tactical skills, those are also soft skills. So things like learning agility and being open and able to adapt quickly, again, a soft skill. So if you're someone who's technical, you may not have thought about that ability that you have as being an advantage, but it absolutely is.
Yeah, I'm happy you said that because honestly, that's one of the things I dealt with. Like people were like, "Jay, you are the jack of all trades, but master of none." And at one period of time, I didn't know how to take it. Like I didn't know how to receive that information. But then I realized I was like, my ability to adapt, to learn really quickly, and then apply new information, tactics, skill sets, whatever the case may be. I'm like, that is my master trait. I'm like, most people don't realize they can do that and or can do that in the first place at all. That's interesting. I see from what I'm understanding is the soft skills are like the principles. Principles don't necessarily change, but the strategies that people do use, right? I'm thinking about like marketing and sales, like the core principles are always there, but how you then apply those principles are different. So that's kind of what I'm understanding from soft skills and hard skills.
Definitely.
Is that right?
Yeah. So you're going to, in your career, you're going to have a set of hard skills that you need to know. And
Mm-hmm.
those hard skills are also enduring things over time, as are the soft skills. But the situations in which you apply them, the context, the environment, all of that changes so quickly.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. I want to dive back a little bit. Most people find it hard to navigate like where they want to go, right? And because you have a lot of different skill sets, how did you find your ability to like stay in one particular lane, or where you're like, hey, I'm gonna like try out multiple lanes, don't really care, and then eventually it'll come back together? How was it navigating through that? Because for me, I'm the type of person I'll just up and jump to the next opportunity because I want to learn this particular thing, and then I'll come back. And some people they can't deal with that kind of risk, I guess. But how have you been able to manage sticking to a lane and or diversing into multiple lanes to finding your own lane?
So it's a very interesting question. And I feel that when we go through school, right, we have some amount of structure, there's a curriculum, these are the things that you need to know, and this is how you learn them, right, in a kind of controlled environment. And I think something that we lose in that is that we all have things that we like doing, but we may not know how to know if that's something that we like doing, right? I meet a lot of people who go, if I ask you a question, right, what do you want? What do you like to do? There's a lot of people that can't answer that question in a full kind of, this is the purpose or the meaning in my life.
Gotcha.
And so I think the way that you would think about that is, I am interested in this thing, but I don't know if it's something that I want to do for my whole life. I don't know if it's something I want to do for my career. So those questions, rather than being a trap, because those questions can absolutely become a trap when you think about the question spiraling and thinking over and over and over again. If you're thinking over and over about something, you probably need some more information. So, what's a small experiment that you can do? Approach your life like you're a scientist or someone, an observer of your current life, of your current state. You go, well, I think I'm interested in this thing. I think I want to do this. I don't know. Maybe I do know, and I'm really, I'm not letting myself know, but I don't know. So, thus, I'm going to design an experiment so that I can get to a point where I do or don't know. And so, for me, it's been, I think that I like this, or people have said I'm good at this thing, but do I actually, and do I want that to be part of my business? Do I want that to be part of my life? So it could be something like, you go back to your childhood and you remember that you really liked dancing. And you go, well, I've not really had a lot of dancing in my life lately. So how do I get a little bit more of that dancing back in my life? Well, maybe I'm not going to be a dancer, or maybe I am, and I don't know that quite yet. But is there a way for me to have a small experiment? So maybe I'm going to go to one dance class, just one. Or maybe I'm going to say, I need some time, so I'm going to sign up for 3 to 6 months of dance classes. And I'm going to use that to kind of reawaken this joy that I had, and I'm going to realize, wow, I really love that. Or maybe I'm going to go to that class and I'm going to realize maybe this isn't my thing anymore, but martial arts might be my thing because movement is really important to me. And so I got more information. Either way, you got more information and then you can adapt from there.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. Then what was that moment? I think you touched on it a little bit, but what was that aha moment? You're like, this is it, soft skills, or like this, I want to create this thing for yourself.
So I think it's always a compilation of moments that kind of cascade and then you make a decision and it's for me it's rarely I wake up and it hits me and I know. It's more so, I maybe I would have figured it out this way if I would have thought more deeply about this specific situation, but here's a moment, here's a moment, here's a moment, here's a moment, and I'm kind of synthesizing all those moments together and then understanding the synthesis of them. Very consulting type approach. But I do that with my life too. So I'm sitting there last summer and I'm thinking, all the things that I've done, how do I connect all the things that I've done into kind of one, you know, that I can explain to people? This is what I do, right? And I had actually just recently given some workshops to some students on soft skills like topics. And I realized that I'd been doing that for 6 years previously as a peer learning consultant with a program that Stanford has. And that, though it was framed as academic skills, the part that I really liked about that was I would always tell people these skills aren't just to be used in an academic environment, they're what allows you to balance your life and, thrive as a professional in your career as well. And just a few people had come up to me after that training and they'd gone, wow, I feel like I could actually talk to someone now. I feel like people always say these are the things you need to do, but then they don't tell you how to actually do them. And so then I thought back through several moments and I realized in many experiences that I've had over the last decade, people have said very similar things. Like, someone said executive presence was important, but I didn't understand what executive presence meant until you with your voice and your hand gestures showed me very deliberately this is executive presence, this is kind of what the executives quote unquote expect. But then the more important part of that is there's so many tactics, right? But what are the tactics for you? Because there's 1,000 things and all of them do work, but not all of them will work for each individual person. So it's a matter of not only understanding kind of the concepts and the systems and the best practices, but then testing them out, much like we talked about with the dancing example, a similar process where you go, oh, well, some people are pretty, sharp, or sharpness is their defining trait as their executive presence. And I'm going to try that as a person. Well, I tried that and that maybe wasn't my optimal. I wanted to have a little bit more enthusiasm or excitement to the way that I spoke while still portraying that credibility, which is absolutely something that you can do. We both have different ways of speaking, but we both come across as credible and respected people when we speak. I think thinking through all of that and that process led me to this is something that's tangibly benefited people over a long period of time. These are durable skills to the point that earlier on terminology, and that's something that I think I'd like to do. Was that kind of how was your process when you were thinking about synthesizing your skills?
First of all, you did a lot. You did a way better job than I probably would have or slash do. I don't know. Mine just became like a rolling evolution. I think that's a commonality for a lot of people that get into coaching and consulting. The space for me, I grew up as an artist, so I just had the skill set as a visual artist and a performance artist. So a lot of what happened to myself came out of interest, but also I had no other opportunities, so I had to create some. For example, I was in school. I had to leave school because of financial reasons. I became a personal trainer because I was physically fit. I enjoyed it. Why not? I had an opportunity. Quickly, when I became a personal trainer, my interest from my creative side led over to branding and marketing for the actual business. So then I moved up to a higher level, and then it just kept escalating and escalating and escalating. But I just found from other people asking me questions about like, hey, you're very good with people. Hey, you like can like you just do real. They love working with you. You're able to walk them through things pretty, pretty good. My aha moment was just other people telling me information that I wasn't paying attention to. They're like, "You're really good at coaching. You should be a coach." I'm like, "Okay, sure.
Mm.
Why not? Let me do this." They're like, "Hey, you can speak well. Like they want to work with you. Try to sign them up." I would sign them up. They're like, "You're good at sales. You should get into sales." I'm like, "Okay, cool. Why not? Let's try it out." So similar to what you're saying is, you know, told me things. I got interested in it. I tried it out, saw that I was good and or not good at it, or I liked the approach that they were doing, and I applied it to myself, and I find my own unique way of going about it. And then from there, everything just kept building on. But I would find inspiration of people and what they were doing, and I could see myself being like that. So eventually, I look back. I'm like, okay, what am I good at? What am I interested in? What do other people typically come to me for? And then from there, that's when it all just kind of came about. I was like, okay, I'm good in sales. I'm good in communications. Really good at like the visual side because I spent over a decade professionally as a visual artist. So I was like, okay, well, what does this look like? What does this come up to? Who are other people in the industry so I can get an idea of where to go? And that's kind of how my trajectory, I guess, came about. I don't know if mine isn't as clearly laid out as yours, but that's basically my roadmap. So, and I still develop, and like I'm still interested in other things of being like, can I add this to my arsenal? And if I do, what does that look like? Does it hinder me? Does it make me better? And maybe I don't have to add it specifically to my arsenal of like my offer. Maybe it's just something I try out, as you mentioned, on the side. And if I like it, cool, add it. If I don't, no worries. I just ditch it. I feel like a lot of people typically, when they're starting to develop their own offer, they feel like they have to completely take over that identity or that. I'm trying to see. They're not identity. Well, yes, identity, but they have to take that on. So it's like, hey, if I want to test being this thing, I am now that thing. It's like, no, 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 no. You're not. You don't have to identify as it. You're trying it out. Like it's you're working through it. And I know I've struggled with that in the past before. So, but you look like you're like, yep, I've experienced that with other people. I'm pretty sure you're like working with other people on these skills. They probably battle between fully accepting and making that their thing versus like, hey, no, like extrapolate. I don't know if that's the right word for this, but basically pick apart this skill set and then add whatever you want and then take away. How do you go about like having these conversations with people when you're adjusting and or helping them through these skill sets? Because your ultimate it ends up to a degree, I feel like either changing or evolving a person's character, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's a really interesting point. So, two things on there. First, I love hearing about how you thought through it. I think one thing in particular I want to highlight from that was that other people were telling you those things, but then you kind of took that in and you realized, oh, actually, that's something that resonates with me. And so, one thing that I find really key for a lot of people is it's hard to know, again, that intuition of, am I good at this? Do I like this? Do I want to do this? And so, if you think about it instead from the perspective of what's a compliment that I got recently that just made me glow, right? So if people are telling you, dang, you're really good at sales, you really make me feel like, I can do it, that I'm empowered, right? Then you go, wait, that was a compliment that really kind of hit. Maybe that's something that I want to, incorporate in whatever life I'm building or career I'm designing for myself. And so that's a good way to kind of get a perspective on something that you may not have internalized yet. But then to your second point on internalizing that fully and having that become your identity, I think the other thing that you said that I really resonate with is the if you like it, you can take it. If not, no worries, right? And
Yeah.
it's again, it's not that it's a bad tactic. Some tactics are bad, but most often it's just not the tactic for you. And that's okay because there's as many ways to be successful as there are people out there. There's as many ways to speak credibly as there are people out there. And it's just a matter of taking in those tactics, trying them out, adjusting them as needed, and then discarding the ones that don't work. And again, continuing to personalize the ones that do. So to your point, when I first started at BCG, big consulting firm, everyone's, I felt that there was one way to be a BCGer when I first started. So my first 6 months, I was just a sponge, absorbing all that knowledge, everything. I thought that this was, what you should do, what you should be. And, I could speak how I should speak, but it felt so not me that it was exhausting to keep up, right? And so what I would always encourage people to do is that was something that kind of I decided to do because I thought that that's what you should do. But really, when I thought about it, who's telling me that that's how I should do it? Or, no one's saying that you have to be one thing or that you have to do one thing one way. And I struggle when people do say that you have to do one thing one way, one type of person, because that doesn't allow you to be yourself. And ultimately, you're going to do better work when you feel more yourself. The instant, it wasn't an instant, but I started to slowly realize, I was like, I am just becoming kind of a compilation of other people. And the reason that I was hired was not to become a compilation of other people. It was because I had cool skills and a personality that was helpful in certain things, right? So how do I bring that back? How do I restore my energy so I don't have to pour all this energy into being the should be version of myself? And how do I take these best practices and my personality and synthesize that so that there's one kind of me that is most effective at my job, but I'm not wasting all this energy trying to be someone else or some other version?
I like that. And you're speaking on something that, whether people know it or not, they do deal with it continuously, especially at each evolution, like without the through your career and even in just regular relationships. Like I know personally speaking, there was a period of time for a relationship back a while ago. I realized I was picking up certain traits and certain things of the other person, which some were good, some were bad. Not bad. Some were good and some weren't as well that I needed and or wanted. But I started realizing from other people telling me, they're like, hey, you're becoming a different person. Which again, it's not good, it's not bad, it's just information. And it made me reflect of like, okay, how far away am I getting from like who I am versus who I want to be? And I think there's an interesting journey everyone has to go through when, hey, you're developing these skills, you're seeing it being done this way, and you're trying to get there, but you're also, as you're mentioning, trying to still keep your uniqueness. And I think it is an interesting dance. I don't like to use the word balance. I think it is an interesting dance most people have to uh, figure out. But I think there is a point to, if you're acquiring these skill sets, whether they're hard or soft skills, that you have to be okay with understanding that you probably will change, and or it is okay to then become this next person. You've never been it. So it's gonna feel unnatural. It's gonna feel like you're losing yourself. It's not that you're losing yourself, you're just becoming another version of yourself. And I feel like I could be wrong, but through your experience, do you feel like a lot of people deal with that mentally? Where it's like, okay, now I am losing myself because I'm doing all these other things I typically wouldn't have done, or I had, or it's an interesting conversation because it's like, yeah, you have no choice. You have to become this, not become this person, but you do have to become the next version. Is that fair?
And it's scary because it's uncertain, and we are wired as humans to fear uncertainty and to fear change, even though that is the only thing that we can rely on. So, how do you become more comfortable with uncertainty as a human? And I don't know that there's necessarily, I guess maybe resiliency is the best soft skill that kind of corresponds to that. But you have to, well, I like to think about it. One metaphor that I like is the idea that you are a tree, right? And the tree has all these rings. So the tree has all the years it's ever lived, all the experiences it's ever had that are kind of a part of the tree. But the tree continues to grow and expand. So it's not necessarily that you are some totally new person. And obviously, at any point in your life, you could choose to become a completely different person in the morning. You totally could. Do I think that that's a way for the change to be sustainable and to stick? No, right? So where you think about, how do I gradually expand? Well, knowing that any other version of me that I liked better or a version of myself that felt truer is still accessible because it's still there. It's still me. But I've now kind of grown and continued to expand. I have these new skill sets that I can also access. And so it is very powerful to say that you are something or that you aren't something, right? So that's a whole nother thing. And that's a whole nother conversation about how do you become something. And Atomic Habits, very, very famous, the you are, when you say you are something, right? And so you shift your identity to that. I think that's helpful. But ultimately, when you talk about sustainable change, which is really what I want to focus on in terms of behavior, right? I do want people to improve their soft skills because, like you said, it impacts every single facet of your life. You can't to have a sustainable, you can't, again, there's no can or can't. It's not hard and fast, right?
Yeah.
But to have something with the greatest likelihood that it'll stick for the longest amount of time, which is largely what people want, right? If you want to become a good communicator, you don't generally say, I want to be the best communicator right now. And then, 2 months from now, I want to not be able to communicate again, right? Because I don't think that you want to go backwards, right? But there's always the potential to go forwards. There's always the potential to continue growing and improving. So maybe you're choosing one thing now. You're like, I'm going to specifically focus on my communication. And then you need to make it even more specific to you. So, what about my communication was or is not serving me the way that I want it to? So, it might be, I feel like I can't speak up in meetings. I feel like no one's going to listen to me and no one cares. And, very common things. I also felt those things. And so then, okay, my goal is that I'm going to speak up more in meetings. Well, to feel comfortable speaking up in meetings, I want to be able to be seen and heard the way that I hear my managers, right? So you can think about, there's so many variations from, ending your questions on a flat note versus ending them on an up note. There is a difference in how you're perceived. And you can listen to people. And this is one of my favorite small sustainable changes, right? People scroll. It's a thing, social media.
Guilty. You got me.
Right? Like I do too, right? And so the next time you're scrolling, maybe just think as you're going along, what was it about that person's voice that made me stop or listen? There's all sorts of podcast clips, right, on social media. You hear the podcast clip. What drew you? Obviously, they might be saying something shocking, and that's what stopped you. But do one question deeper and ask about their voice. What is it about their voice? What is it about their body language or their posture that made you think this is a credible person that I could listen to? And is there some way that you can start to incorporate that in your own life? Right.
Yeah,
So that's one example of the small sustainable changes that we can start to make.
you're having me reflect on a lot of different things, and even currently right now as I produce content and specifically how I work with people, work with my clients, like even the fact of holding a stylus right now, even though as a designer and an artist I'm used to having a pencil of some sort in my hand, but specifically when I'm having conversations or when I'm coaching, there's a guy named Tom Young that I am very inspired by. He's more prevalent right now on social platforms because he's building his personal brand. And I'm loving the approach that he's taking on certain things. And I was breaking that down literally before getting on this call and just understanding like, well, I like the fact that he has the pencil in his hand because I can resonate that. It makes me feel comfortable in
Mhm.
general talking and like why do I like the way he's approaching it versus somebody else's content. So it is interesting. It also made me reflect back in college. I took a improv class, and on
Mm.
the last, I think it was our last assignment slash major project, we had to create a character. Like, who were they? How did they think? Well, how did they live? How did they dress? All this other stuff. And then we had to embody it because we were going to perform as that character. And I think as people if they like start to look at that, kind of like what you're talking about, and they write these characteristics down and these traits, but they take it layers by layers. Well, why do they dress like that? How like do they put one sock on before the other one? Well, why did they do that? Where did they get that from? And it's really just pulling back, continuously asking the questions and being curious that then they can move forward and like engineer that for themselves. But how do you walk people through that? Because I know you do workshops, I know you like have consultancy with people. What is like the process if someone's saying, hey Faith, I kind of want to develop some soft skills, or my team needs to develop soft skills? Because I would believe that it would be different from an individual to a group. Or is there no difference, really?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I love the pencil thing. I love that you're taking notes and you're asking questions about that, right? Deliberate questions matter a ton. So, to your point, every single person is different and individual, and every single company is too. So, there's almost nothing that I can say that's going to apply equally and in the same way, in the same context to every single type of person or every single group. So, the first focus for me is really what do you need? What are your problems? What are
Well,
you specifically facing?
what if someone doesn't know their problem?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So happy to observe. I think that having someone who has been in the organization that's similar or who has been in a similar position, you can start to see the problems come up, and that's where you get like the consulting model where you go in and you do a diagnostic and you say, hey, I've sat with your teams, I've been in the edge of meetings, I've been taking notes, I've been seeing how people do their processes, and I've been noticing ways that we can make it more efficient, things that people don't feel as comfortable doing that we can do some training on, right? Because to your point, but every person will be able to articulate to you what problems they are personally experiencing. Now, whether those are problems that are, the most pressing or prioritized for the group, or whether that's a problem that's a perception instead of like a specific problem that's happening, I find that too. So that's very interesting because someone will say, oh, I'm having this issue with this person, right? But the issue is not necessarily that there's actually an issue there. It's that you need to have a conversation
Mm.
to talk through, this was someone's perception, this was not the intention, this was how it came across, this is how you're coming across. And to your point, I mean, even when you're thinking about what you want to do in life, other people tell you what you're good at sometimes, and you take that as information, but you may not know. And we don't often tell people, we don't often show people deliberately how to grow. Oftentimes it's just, well, you do the thing, and then if you do it wrong, well, that's not the way that you're supposed to do it, right? But could we articulate what was supposed to happen? So a lot of times you can get at the things that need to be improved in an organization, and the things that training wise would be helpful is if you have, some knowledge of this was a problem, here's why it was a problem, this is what we would have preferred to have happened. Well, can we practice that in a safe environment? Because how our brains love to learn is in environments where we're repeating something, but it's very safe. There's no, you're not going to get eaten.
Your fight or flight system is not elevated at this point.
Yeah, right.
You're
You're
good.
calm, you're thinking through it as a team, and you're getting aligned on your goals too. And I think that's another piece that sometimes people struggle with is what do we really want to have happen? It's great when you see a headline and you go, oh, well, so if you're a business owner, I want to have a 7-figure business. Do you want to have a 7-figure business, or do you want that because you've been told that you should want that, or do you want that because you're assuming that it's going to give you something that you could actually get in a different way, right? Like it's important to question and then align on the goals specifically relating to you. So again, super different for every single organization and individual, but a way that you can start doing that is by sitting people down and talking about, what is something that you spend all your time on that you maybe don't want to be spending all your time on? Or what is an issue that you're experiencing with the organization that's making you feel like you can't be your full self, or you're going to be making more mistakes, and just having that open, honest conversation with people. Now, that's difficult to do, but it helps when you have a sense of kind of pre-built community. So I am a big fan of wacky icebreakers. Because I think
Wacky
when you
ice.
start a training with wacky icebreaker, people go, oh yes, I'm remembering that I'm in a room full of people. And I think for young, especially for people who are just coming into the workforce, there's this perception sometimes that like this is the boss, and the boss is
Yeah.
this, person that's kind of inaccessible, but you kind of forget that they also might have a dog and they like coffee and they do this and that, and just like you.
Hmm.
So if you remind people, we're in this together, we all have these really cool, interesting, exciting experiences, and we all want to use them as effectively as we can, and we want to feel inspired and comfortable and safe in this environment, um, and that's going to allow us to do better work, then yeah, absolutely. So it's not just from, I work with a lot of people who are Gen Z. And leaders will come to me and they're like, I'm having all these problems with Gen Z. And I go, I understand, right? And but then you look at Gen Z and you look at how willing they are to learn, how excited they are by upskilling. I mean, I read a stat that said 96% of Gen Z folks spend at least an hour a week independently doing upskilling on some sort of thing, right? So there's a lot of openness to learning.
Guilty.
Absolutely, right? So we have a case study right here. So you have the leaders who have very real problems. They're experiencing real problems, but those problems can be solved. And those problems can be solved. But then at the same time, you also have the leaders who can learn things from the Gen Z approach as well. And things like psychological safety as a leader is massively important because how you react when your team member makes a mistake, for example, that's going to impact the rest of the time that this employee is spending working with you, you know?
Right.
And a lot of times as a leader, you're not aware of how that came across to someone. And it's hard if you're the more junior person in the situation to honestly share some feedback with a leader that, you worry that that could negatively impact you. But the senior leader is craving it, right? They want that. So how do you, create an environment where that person feels comfortable enough to tell you, hey, this is something that, this is how it impacted me and this is how, we can work together and we can have a better working relationship. And then the senior person can share, hey, this is how I perceived what you did. And, maybe that wasn't your intention, but, we're not going to assume things about each other. We're both going to, because our goals are the same. So when you started with that goal, that consensus building, we all want things to go well. We want it to be a good working environment. We want to be as productive as possible, as efficient as possible, as, have the best teaming environment and atmosphere. But how do you do that is always such an interesting question.
Yeah, I can see that because from leading teams, overseeing my own location, and then like being in teams as well, it's an interesting dance for sure because you need the feedback so that you can make sure everybody's okay, but also you're doing good and you can improve. But there is a line that, or I don't say a line, but there are certain situations where when you're in that when you're at that top level, you do have to be very firm on certain things in order to make sure that the engine is still running efficiently. So it is very, it's, and then you're also dealing with just two different types of people and generations who grew up very differently in different structures and understanding how to go about things. So like bridging that gap can be, I would say, fun.
Well, fun. Absolutely. But I mean, it starts with remembering that all people are the people and that people probably want the same things. And how do you build that consensus around this is what our goal is? Our approaches are differing right now. Why are our approaches differing? Let's solve that. Like a very problem solving focused as opposed to, people butting heads, which again happens, understandable, but also ultimately we want to solve the problem, right? So,
Yes, we do. You're good. So kind of pivoting a little bit, you've written a lot of articles. You've done a
yes.
lot of work. I love storytelling because I have an illustration background, and majority of everything we do is about storytelling, right? Now, for you, how have you been able to articulate this story with people and companies about the importance of acquiring slash advancing these soft skills?
Yes. So storytelling, you could consider storytelling a soft skill if you wanted to.
I believe it is.
And I think it starts with, just talking through examples and understanding what the difference can look like in an environment where everyone is improving their soft skills. And I think that most people are very interested in learning how this can impact them because they've started to think, oh, well, I recognize that it's important to have soft skills, but how? And that how storytelling is absolutely an element. So in a presentation, way more memorable to have a story setting to take people through, journey. Even a lot of the metaphors that we use are things based on stories, right? We're going on this journey, this adventure, this quest. Let's think about it as an adventure. Let's think about it as a quest. Our quest to get soft skills. So I think that you can layer in a lot of elements that make it fun, and fun is also an excellent way to learn. a lot of times when people go to trainings, they go, the training is just this 1 hour thing. I'm going to be bored out of my mind. I have my phone on the side. I'm going to do whatever, right? And it can actually be this kind of adventure type experience. It can be, and it's not just a one time thing. So, you know, little different than the storytelling, but you use things like spaced repetition that reminds you at a certain interval where your brain is primed to be reminded because your brain's struggling to decide, is this something I'm going to lock down in my long term memory or not? Then it goes, oh, I've been reminded. Okay, that's another signal that I want to lock this down in my mind so that I actually learn something, I actually internalize that. Stories are absolutely a tool that's used for that too. But I think to your point, I started as a journalist. The skills from that have always been super useful. Cold calling actually is something,
Wow, was not
as a
expecting that.
journalist, I'm sitting there and I'm going, huh, okay, yeah, yeah, I gotta do this. Okay, I gotta call this person. I have no idea who they are, and I have to ask them some very personal questions about their life, and then I gotta write that down and make it a story. So how do you synthesize all those pieces together? And that's actually where a lot of the continuous improvement side of things. So back to the very first answer with the separation of arts and sciences, you're bringing them back together where you're going, okay, to solve a problem, I need all the pieces to tell the story because we're telling a different story now. And I think all the things that we've been talking about, like identity wise, too, those are all stories. And those are stories that maybe you're either being told or stories that you're telling yourself. But at any point, you could choose to tell different stories to yourself or to other people. So that's absolutely an element as well. And so I think, regardless of the application, storytelling as a skill is something really valuable to have. It makes things more fun and more rich and enjoyable, which is ultimately what we want.
I like that. So I want to talk about some hard skills, aka AI and technology. But before we do that, what have you, let's say like 3 to 5 soft skills you see a lot of people typically wanting to adopt and or should focus in on a little bit more, especially in this time period?
So I think two of the biggest ones that leaders want is critical thinking and communication. Communication could be anything from how to present to how to, manage upwards to how to report out. And so all of those skills, kind of the foundation is communication. And I think a third one that's particularly important and has been really important since pandemic, even before, is resiliency. Resiliency is a skill that you can learn. And it's also a skill that a lot of Gen Z folks lack. And that's something that, you can build. You can absolutely get there. Soft skills, the great thing is that they're all learnable. And there's all strategies and tactics and things that you can do to get there. But it's about reverting from this sense of, I don't have this autonomy. I don't have the ability to do anything. I feel very like constrained, like there is nothing that I can do. Maybe I'm useless or there's no hope or everything's really bad. And I think that all of these absolutes come from this place of I can't do anything. Well, you can absolutely do things. It's really, really hard, but you can do things. You can learn things. Everything is learnable. Moving from that place of this is where I'm feeling, this is how I'm feeling, and I'm feeling very stuck to this is how, I know that this is learnable. I know that it's going to be challenging, but I know that I'm going to get there. See a lot of really positive things around that. And I think those are kind of maybe the top 3 soft skills that I'm seeing at the moment.
It's interesting because as much technology as I say this all the time, and because I heard it from somewhere and it just hit me like a bell or whatever. As much technology we have and accessibility to tools to communicate, it feels like for some reason, and maybe we're a little bit better now, but it feels like for some reason it's harder for people to communicate. And I'm curious to know why. Is it because of like that interpersonal interactions that we don't have as often, like we're not put into environments that force us to communicate, right? Which then pandemic didn't help us much either. Not being, I think personally to a degree, not being involved into as many physical activities which force you then to have to communicate and build that camaraderie with people. I know like every time I have every time I talk to some of my friends and people that don't know me, they're like, you're very easy to talk to. I was like, well, I have a lot of siblings. I was in 3 different dance academies. I went to musical theater. Like, I was like, I was surrounded by people. I didn't have no other choice but to communicate. I didn't know that until looking back. I figured everybody just talks. I don't
Yeah.
know. But do you think, is it because of that? Being not as surrounded by everyone and like the fact of working from home and not being involved in as many activities, that's why our communication skill isn't as worked on per se?
Definitely. So I think that's 100% an element. The other two elements that come to mind for me is one is technology and one is community focused environments. So I think that the US has greatly declined over the last like couple of decades in terms of community focused environments. So to your point, when you're in a sport or you're integrated in a community, you're having lots of interactions and you're having interactions that are in person. You're having interactions that, you're taking in all sorts of cues and things that really are hard to translate in a technological medium or in a lack of being in person together. And so you have that, but then you have increasing amounts of that. So not only are you more separated, I mean, more people than ever are saying that they're lonely. They don't feel like they're integrated into a community, that they have a sense of community, that they have friends, that they have. And we talk about social fabric, we talk about when it comes to longevity and life and just having a good quality overall of life, not even to mention work, you need to have those close ties, right? And so communicating in an interpersonal sense is absolutely going to help you communicate better in a work sense. But that's kind of like a broader social picture. And then you add to that the technology and the disruption of a pandemic, and you have, technology conversations, and those conversations are very, bite size, and they often don't include a ton of information like when you would be in person, right? So when you're in person, I think it's over 50% of the cues and the nonverbals and everything that you're getting, that's in person only. And there's no way to translate that into a digital medium. But the types of communication that you have digitally too are, very small snapshots. We talk about how it's hard to understand tone in a text, right? So there's that. But then you have so much more texting as opposed to spending time in person with people. There's all sorts of charts and graphs where you can look at and you can see that the average American's technology use is 7 hours or 8 hours. So people are spending a large majority of their time in addition to work, on top of work, and it's cutting into sleep, it's cutting into family time, it's cutting into, to your point, physical activities, things that we do outside. And it's harder. There's this paradox where it's easier than ever to connect in, say, social media, right? There's always people there. You can always scream your thoughts into the void or whatever you want to do. But there's less and less of, and it's harder to get into an in-person environment because you're like, well, I have this social connection. I can text my friend, like I could talk to my friend. That's enough, right? But is that enough? And I think increasingly you see research show that that's not enough. And then that negatively impacts how you communicate with your coworkers and how you build a business and how you create a business. And I think one of the technology pieces to, I think we're starting to talk some about like, and its impacts there.
Yeah.
And I think that there's amazing impacts. At the same time, there's a humanness that people are just craving, right? And it's so hard to motivate yourself to get that experience. But do you ever feel bad that you did? Do you wish that you would not have? I think that there might be some situations in which you're like, that didn't quite go how I planned. But that's an important component of building resiliency, which helps you in so many different things, right? I didn't do so great. Well, that gave me some information. So maybe I can change my behavior and adjust the things that I need to for the next interaction to go better, right? So when you have less and less of that feedback, I mean, think of yourself as an AI model. AI models, well, I think when people talk about AI, first there's like AI and then there's Gen AI. But a lot of times we just call Gen AI AI. And Gen AI is like the LLMs and the chatbots and ChatGPT, large, taking in lots of data, then, spitting out that information versus, AI, that's a subset. But the core kind of, one of the core tenets of AI is you're inputting information and then you're doing increasing amount of tests to get more, precision. So if you're training your model, think of yourself as an AI model, You need all that input, that human interaction input. The less you have, the less refined your model gets. And it's not a linear relationship. I guess I don't know if there's specific science that says it's not a linear relationship, but what I've seen from my interactions with people, my clients, is it's not. The less interactions you have, the degradation happens pretty exponentially, pretty quickly. But that is a positive thing if you get that experience again, because you're able to relatively quickly start to learn those and start to regain those skills. So you can compare yourself to an AI if that helps in terms of the model training piece. But
I think in a way though you can. I mean, if you look at your brain, it's just to a degree like a computer, and I think a lot of people forget that. And back to the comment that you said about like the inputs versus outputs. A lot of people don't seek the feedback, they don't seek the criticism, they don't seek for to acquiring new information, right? So it's like you're only hindering yourself and your ability to then create the best output at the end of the day. Now, what I love about technology, especially for coaches and consultants and helping other people do what we do, is it makes it easier for anyone who has a passion or a skill set to build a coaching or consulting, right? Now for yourself, I'm assuming you use a good amount. You sound very knowledgeable in this space, utilizing the technology. But have you seen people being like, okay, you're utilizing AI and technology, but you talk about soft skills? These are like two opposing things. Do you feel like people can utilize utilize the technology to better enhance or identify their soft skills that's needed, or how do they work with both of them?
yeah, so those are really interesting points. To your point on democratizing technology,
Mhm.
usage so that you can create a business easier. I think that's absolutely a positive. I'll have my little rant about how technology degrades our social skills, but I think that there's so many benefits from it too, right? As a personal example, my dad was deployed overseas in the military, and the second time he was deployed, we were actually able to communicate with him via Skype. And so just something like that, you get to interact with your dad, and here's my dad, he's here, we're talking to him kind of live. That wouldn't have been something that we were able to do the first time he was deployed, for example, and that changed things a ton. So for all the drawbacks, there are all of those positives. So when you are like a coach and a consultant, the way that I like to think about the technology is, think about it like you're hiring someone. When you hire someone for a very specific need. You hire them because you either don't want to do that work, or you could use your time better doing something else. And so think about, maybe you spend a week going through your task list and you realize, this task, don't love doing. This task takes so much time. I wish I could reallocate that time to something else. Then use those and say, oh, well, I spent all of this time making content and that was really hard for me, and I wish that I could spend more time doing something else that's going to get me better results or be a better use of my time. Okay, then start looking for a tool that can help you do that. So that's kind of like a framework that I like to have people kind of think through, because also using AI whenever you can use AI is also maybe not the optimal strategy, because it can degrade certain skills. I mean, there's a lot of studies around how using ChatGPT to a large extent in your work can degrade your own sense of critical thinking and your own creativity, because you become very reliant on something. I think becoming reliant on anything, I mean, we talk about, right, substances, there's the concept of moderation, and I think the concept of moderation when it comes to tech tools is also important to apply. So maybe you have identified these couple of tasks that can be streamlined or made more efficient. The other, nuance I think to the conversation is, where are your differentiators? And so if you have a key differentiator in the way that you service your customers, and customers are constantly saying, wow, your service is incredible, maybe choosing an option that is cheaper or an option that is easier in one sense for your service, like, making it all ChatGPT or AI agents, maybe that's not something that's a good idea if your service is your differentiator, right? And maybe you want to have kind of like a medium approach. So, you want to have well, if this is an easy, I don't want my sales reps to be constantly going through, or my customer service reps to be constantly going through and doing the same thing over and over and over because someone had a wrong order, or, someone messed their address, right? Like that's something that I can probably delegate. And so I see companies, start to do that where there's still an option to connect with a human. And that's, the way that I'd like to keep it, and I think most people would like to keep it as well, is AI systems with human in the loop and AI systems that augment humans. Because AI can be really efficient when it comes to, say, you're trying to calculate a route that is most optimal, or even if you're planning a vacation and you wanna do these like 10 places, but like in what order, or what are the places within those places that correspond to the specific subset of factors that I'm most interested in. And that way, you can greatly improve your efficiency. But, do you want to write all of your website copy with AI? Maybe not, because most people at this point have kind of, there's some spidey senses where they go, ah, yes, I think that was just a AI, right? And so if you want to have it create an initial version of something for you, or spark some inspiration, that can be a better use case, or some efficiency gains, as opposed to letting it do the thinking for you.
Yeah, dude. And you're completely right on that. One of the biggest things I try to do is I don't just specifically tell like ChatGPT what to do. I try to have a conversation with it in order to then give me feedback so I can still work on like my critical thinking and understanding, do I want to do this? Do I want to do this? Should we change that? So I try to treat it like a person to then get it to ask me questions back so I can still think through the process as well versus just taking it for what it is and then like pushing it forward. I'm like, no, let me still make sure I know what I'm doing up here. With that being said, I know we're coming somewhat towards the end. I have a question because you're developing, is it a 17th book or
Yeah, so I'm writing my 17th book now.
oh my God. That is very impressive. That is, I applaud you. One of these days, I am going to write a book. That is something. Even though English and writing was not my forte. I was more of a math and science person. I did tell myself I do want to write a book. I think everybody should write their book, quote unquote, for sure. But tell us a little bit about this book. What is the concept of this book, or where's the direction it's going?
So I write fantasy, sci-fi, adventure type books. I've been writing pretty seriously for my whole life. Those are just the books that I've written after the age of 13, 14, which is when I consider them to be quote unquote real books. Before then, they were books, but they were either shorter books, or they maybe weren't finished, or there would be significant work that would be required to turn them into something that someone could see. So, the book I'm writing right now is a dark fantasy. If you've heard of the dark academia genre, it's got some elements of that. But instead of being set on the East Coast in the Gothic architecture there, it's actually set in the North California redwoods. So it's got some redwood Gothicism. It's got some commentary on society and technology and magic. And I'm really enjoying writing it so far.
That's awesome. I love that kind of stuff. Like I grew up, this is kind of interesting to share, but grew up playing in the woods and kind of like being involved with nature, but just also on like Lord of the Rings and the originals and you name them. So it's like I like that, and it's always interesting whenever I meet someone in person and we're talking. They're like, "I would have never thought you would have liked this kind of encounter." I was like, "I promise you, there's a whole other side of me that just is just
Yeah.
let's
Well,
hang
we're
out."
all multifaceted human beings. We're multifaceted human beings, and I love that. I'm actually curious, if you were going to write your book, what do you think, genre-wise, style-wise, idea-wise, it would look like?
Jeez, I don't know. That's a good question. I feel like it'd probably be a combination of different things. I'm not the good best when it comes to genres, but
No.
I typically have written and trying to tell like my story through a version of as he like if I
Mm.
told the story to someone and he had to tell it to somebody else.
Mhm.
So that's typically how I write, to where it's like a like the outer body perspective of looking at this person. versus saying like me myself and writing through it. So, but also with that being said, I use a lot of illustration because as an
Mm,
artist, I'm painting a lot. It's funny. I remember distinctly one of the papers I had in school. I wasn't that good at introductions. You know how you got to write the introduction, you got to do the conclusion. Yeah, I was never good at the first part. I was like, I don't know how to start this. Can we just jump to the body of it? So I would always just tell a story. And I remember one time I had to do. I wrote a paper about like firefighters or whatnot. But the beginning of the story was describing this little girl that was underneath the bed of this fire that was happening. And I was describing like from the different colors, from the temperature of like just what her body was like feeling, the images that she was seeing. And then before you knew it, you realize like, oh, like he's just talking about like the story of the chick that's like getting saved by a firefighter. But I'm watching my professor read my paper and she like starts crying in the beginning. I was just like, why? I'm like, why is she crying? What's going on? What's going on? And then it jumps to like statistics. She was just like, I didn't know. I totally forgot that you were writing a paper about this particular topic. I thought this was something else.
yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Mhm.
it would probably be a combination of different things. But I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out. I'll send you a snippet to show you, and maybe you can tell me, hey, this would be in this kind of genre,
Yeah,
or whatnot.
absolutely. That's so cool.
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
glad you had
it's
that experience. I love that.
I've gotten it a couple different times. It's interesting because like I don't see myself as a writer, right? The
But
whole
what is a
identity.
writer? What is a writer? You know?
Exactly. I feel that way when people tell me like, "Oh, I'm not an artist." I'm like, "Yes, you are." Anyways, we can. Everyone's an artist of some form or fashion. But with that being said, as we wrap up, where can people find you, follow you if they're interested in developing these soft skills or just want to explore more about like your work? What would be the best place for them to learn and connect with you?
So I have a website. It's espercollective.com and there's a contact form there. But if you'd like to see more of my business side of things, more of the upskilling, that would be my LinkedIn at my name or my Instagram at Esper Collective is more so on the writing side of things. So I write, I have my business, I do both. You don't have to choose. And I'd be happy to have you follow me there.
Perfect. Awesome. And then with that being said, thing on this show is we like to leave people with like one piece of insight. So it can be either business, it can be outside of business, just what's one piece of insight you would like to leave people with for the show?
That's a great question. I'm going to go with you don't have to choose. I think that so often we think that things are one and done. You made the choice, you can't go back. There's nothing else you can do. And truly, there's so few irreversible choices that we make in life. You can't unhave a child, right? But there's very few things where, you make the decision and you can never go back. To people who are really struggling with what do I do next? What do I do with it? What do I do in my life? Choose one thing. That was my mom's advice for me when I had all these interests. I wanted to do all this stuff. She's like, just choose one thing that you're going to do first. That's your first thing. And then once you're done with that, you can choose the next thing, right? And so it becomes what next? And wow, there's so many possibilities for things that I can do next, as opposed to I've made this choice, now I'm going to stay there. I have to do this thing. I can't go back.
It reminds me, and maybe it was my mom as well too, but it was don't look for the right choice, just look for the next choice. And they're like, yeah, but what if his isn't right? It's okay, then just look for the next choice after that, like the next step, basically. Because it's like as long as you still have the goal, you can maneuver however you need to. Like you're still going to get there. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I needed that personally because there was something. Even right now, I'm like, okay, do I do this? Do I not do this? So I'm like thinking through this in my head. So this was like a sign for myself. So I appreciate the reminder.
Thank you. It was excellent speaking with you. Great questions, great conversation. Thank you so much.